The need for political stabilization is, I believe, the most urgent task facing Kenyans today. And it is the foundation, upon which our greater justice, fairness, health, wealth, and security will be built on. And for this reason, I want to believe, honorable members, that that which did not happen will happen.
All right, so that's President Uhuru Kenyatta giving his State of the Nation address earlier this week and basically revisiting the question of the BBI, talking about this thing that he calls political stabilization. And he basically said that even if we haven't resolved it now, even if we don't, when we go to the next election, whichever administration comes will definitely have to deal with it. A very interesting statement there, Jamila. I don't know what you heard the president to be saying.
Alikuwa anasema kitu inarudi. It's not the end, maybe. Because even yesterday when in Nakuru, I think even Raila Odinga said, reggae, imeenda half time, that it's not over until it's over, which is not, despite what the court said, despite from the High Court, the Court of Appeal, all those issues, it's still not over. But will it be possible with the calendar that we have between now and August 9th, 2022? And if not, afterwards, he has to, for it to happen, I think, after the elections, after 2022, I think whoever needs to be in office should be someone who would be willing to go through this process all over again, Joe. But something else that he said that I think we need to listen to, where he says the amendment sought to cure winner takes all, if we can hear that.
Revital exported 7. The third loss was about expanding our national executive to accommodate a broader face of Kenya and to expand representation. This would have constitutionalized the end of the winner-takes-all outcomes of elections that creates so much toxicity and tension. Again, honorable members, this did not happen. Honorable members, we cannot behave like the proverbial ostrich and bury our heads in the sand. A constitutional moment does not resolve itself simply by being ignored.
A constitutional moment. Remember winner takes all, Joe? Remember those 5 positions that were proposed in the BBI amendments? That was an attractive selling point for politicians who, of course, they were all clamoring, and those who were supporting it, hoping that if this thing passes, they'll all get a chance at leadership. But I'm sure you'll chambua this a bit more. For me, when I was listening to the State of the Nation address, with everything that the president said and the fact that he included this bit, the BBI, and his disappointment in it not passing, there are a few things that, in my opinion, he should have said that he didn't. For me, one important one is the fact that he did not talk at all about corruption. I think he mentioned it once in his speech when he was talking about what Kajiado County did to try and curb corruption. I think there was some relief food that was disappearing, and he did mention corruption, just that one point there in his speech, which was about 2 hours long. And for me, I was a bit disappointed in that because I expected him to talk more about this, because remember, you still have the KEMSA scandal. Remember, I think it was in the 2019 State of the Nation address, Yvonne, where he said that there will be no sacred cows, and he talked about how corruption, those who are involved, action will be taken against them. And I expected him to at least, this could be his last one. He still can do one more constitutionally. I expected him to talk about that. And also, one more thing that I expected the president to talk about was the runaway public debt. Comparing that when he became president in 2013 and when he is leaving, that difference is very high. And one more thing that he did not talk about is the executive's disobedience of court orders. That was not mentioned. So for me, I felt that he did not have to talk to us about the BBI, because as it stands now, hata kama reggae iko on pause, it's not a priority for us as a nation. These other issues were, and when he did not mention them, I didn't expect that at all.
Allow me to pick up from Jamila and where he talked about the economy. And let's just hear him make this statement that, in fact, Kenya is now the 6th wealthiest nation in Africa.
In 2013, Kenya was Africa's 12th wealthiest nation with a GDP of 4.74 trillion Kenya shillings. This GDP was accumulated in a span of 123 years through 4 administrations before ours, because I include the colonial administration. In just 8 years, my administration has multiplied the GDP by a factor of 2+. Today, our GDP stands at Kenya shillings 11 trillion, up from the 4.75 trillion, and from being ranked as the 12th wealthiest nation in Africa when I took over, we have now moved 6 ranks to become the 6th wealthiest nation in the continent on account of the choices that we have made.
So the president spent quite a bit of time speaking about the economy and even linked it, to the BBI. Remember, he made the comparisons about how much money that was lost during the election period in 2007, and also made reference to the same in 2013, which he had used quite a bit as a justification for, the BBI and sort of what you were saying, the winner takes all, and doing that. And I think we'll come back to that in a moment, but listen, these are a few things that really bothered me about this when we talk about, the state of debt in the country. 7.7 trillion shillings. In fact, he spoke in glowing terms about the economy, but didn't speak about, the other elephants in the room. In fact, today, the Treasury is warning of a borrowing crisis despite a growing economy. I would ask his speechwriters to kindly not cite the Ease of Doing Business report by the World Bank that was discontinued in September, discredited. There was corruption allegations around that. That would not be wise to do that. And then, even if you take a look at our debt situation, apparently 66% of our ordinary revenues goes to servicing our goes to servicing our debt. So that would ordinarily mean that for every 100 shillings that you collect, 66 goes to paying debt. And that's 30 shillings or 34 shillings that's left for development. That means there's very little. And all of these are, available, from the Parliamentary Budget Office and from a number of other offices, that exist. So a lot that is happening with the president in this speech when it comes to the economy wasn't very honest on the other end of what we are struggling with. But then again, still using the economy to justify what was a political situation, is that not so? Saying, look, but we lost a lot of money here during an election, and this is why I needed a handshake that then sorts out a political crisis that then precipitates an economic one. And then he talked about how much money we lost for every working hour, for the working day, for 123 days. That was, I think, from the moment we had the election to the Supreme Court petition and the repeat election, occasionally trying to make that connection, and I'm not sure that it's...
Actually, he did make a very strong connection, so much so that he actually said that in the second quarter, the economy grew by 10%. He said 10.4, I think it was, the highest we have ever seen in this country, which was interesting. And I think the larger point the president is making, which is even connected to whatever he might say when we get into the election campaign season a bit more seriously, is that, look, the country's problem is political, that whatever else has been going on in this country can be traced down to the political question. And I think that is what he means when he talks about political stabilization. I mean, as to how much that explains all the problems that we've had in this country is a totally different question. But I think what he was saying throughout that bit where he linked to the economy, to the politics of the country, and to this whole BBI question, he's basically saying that we will need BBI. And I suspect that when he gets out there, because I think he will get out there to campaign, I think he will be saying that let's get somebody who will ensure that BBI comes back, that will ensure that those losses that he talked about are actually reversed, because he characterized them as things we lost as a result of not passing the BBI bill, as a result of the BBI not going to the people and actually affecting the Constitution in the manner that they had intended. So he listed all of these things, and he's essentially saying, look, for the period that we've had this political stabilization, the economy has grown. But that now is at risk depending on what we do next year. So I think the president is creating a condition where it will be easier for him to now pick up this conversation and run with it when that time for the campaigns started. Obviously, very conveniently not discussing some of the things that people will be raising about his record on the economy and all of that. But I think he has found this explanation that he says is basically the magic wand, that if we sort out the politics, then the economy kind of will fall in place.
Yeah, but I think he needs to perhaps think about getting the story straight when it comes to the economy, and perhaps using it to make a political argument. And I think that is something that needs to be key, because on the one hand, this was the same president who told us that the country is losing 2 billion shillings every day due to corruption. Yet this is something that is conspicuously missing. And then to come back and say, okay, well, it's not so much a corruption issue, but it really is a political issue. And once we sort that out, then the economy is sorted. Let's not talk about the runaway spending. Let's not talk about the runaway borrowing. Let's not talk about the return on investment. You know, let's not talk about the fact that even if you want to blame it on the COVID-19 pandemic, which is partly true, it has obviously put a lot of pressure on the economy, on jobs, on exports, but that we all know, and we've said it around this table before, that this country has not been doing well even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this will be an interesting thing, I think, to continuously use the economic question towards making a political argument. How far that can be stretched is what we'll have to wait and see.
You see, the question of a winner-takes-it-all kind of a scenario, relating it to the kind of a system that we have, a presidential, pure presidential system, where you have only 2 key positions, the president and the deputy president. The proposal to expand the executive to include the prime minister and 2 deputies, ostensibly to make it a more inclusive system, is one of those issues that the president, you could see the loss, because the difference is about 1 year. When he was in Parliament in November last year, that is where he talked at length about the First Amendment, the clamor for constitutional changes. And so 1 year later, he came with a 234-page speech that was 312 paragraphs. You remember even he had to skip some of them because time was clearly running out. But it is also important to put some things in context. For example, if some of the things that the president says were not achieved but will be attained in one way or another later, there would probably be 2 routes to going about it. Either do it after the general election next year in August, or maybe use the parliamentary route. And if you're to use the parliamentary route, first, there are quite a number of things that need to be sorted out first. The first one being the Supreme Court matter that where the BBI is currently at. The hearing is on 18th of January or thereabout.
Yeah.
So give it even a month or thereabout for the decision to be made. So the earliest you will get a verdict is the first week of March or thereabout. 5 months to the general election, so I highly doubt any major movements can be done. And then secondly, look at Parliament. I mean, they have gone on recess today. They come back mid-January, end of January. I would think next year, the main preoccupation for Parliament will be 2 things: division of revenue and county allocation bill. Otherwise, you will see a scenario where there will be serious quorum hitches in that house. Why? Because you're looking at nominations coming up early part of next year. So which MP will want to be in the house, yet they have to deal with nominations in their locality? So some of these proposed changes, especially some of the bills that are pending relating to the general election next year, unless there is heavy mobilization and lobbying for MPs to come back to the House maybe early or for special sittings, some of these things probably will have to be done after the general election.
Linus?
Well, let me take you back to the
this BBI issue and the apparent attempt to resuscitate it in the presidential speech, complete with that statement that says, what did not happen will not happen. Sorry, what did not happen will now happen. I don't know what that message means, especially considering that the case is before the Supreme Court. Is the president suggesting that somehow the court will rule in favor of BBI? Because that is the implication of that statement. There's also something that comes out from both the tone and the text of the president, and that is he's still smarting from some of the decisions that are being made by the judiciary on political questions. In fact, at some point, he referred to them as some people that sat
in a dark room.
Kwa kona mahali.
Dark room somewhere.
Yes, and I think I want to give the president the benefit of the doubt, and let's blame these faceless speechwriters. How do you put something like that in a presidential speech in the last 8 months of an outgoing president? I mean, symbol of national unity, you want to leave the country in a certain shape, and you would not be seen and should not be seen as this president that is bitter with one arm of government. You still have these unresolved issues. Because remember where the president is coming from in his relationship with the judiciary is a place that is full of illustrations of hostility. How Akora, you know, and things like that from 2017 and coming this way. So when you have that tone and going into when the case is now proceeding to the Supreme Court, then obviously eyes will be raised again in the same way they were when he made that speech in Kisumu during the national holiday. Francis, you were down there in Kisumu, where the president really targeted the judiciary again. Here is something else that speechwriters and the president keep throwing into the speech. Constitutional moment. I think constitutional experts would almost, smile when they hear that, because really, constitutional moment, that is arguable. It's debatable. Is this a constitutional moment, or is this a political proposal that is being made by this president and his political side on what he wants the country to be organized less? Constitutional moments actually force the hands of very reluctant leaders. And around this time in 1991, December 1991, when KANU gathered in Kasarani for the National Delegates Congress, KANU was still a very, very strong party. And remember, it went on to rule for another 10 years. They were actually going to afford more tear gas, more street battles, and delay multipartyism as much as they could. But President Daniel Arap Moi read the constitutional moment. Constitutional moments, they are forces that are external. Really, they come and impose themselves on the country. It's not a scripted thing. And when even KANU delegates were still saying, let's keep one-party state, Moi knew, no, we can't carry it beyond here. And he said, wacha tutoi section 2A, ndio tuone how many members do we actually have in KANU. Yeah. He reversed it this way. But definitely he knew that, the force out there is too strong. That was a constitutional moment. We've had a few others after that, including, of course, the Bomas conference, post the 2002 election. That was a constitutional moment because it built up with all these promises, and the National Rainbow Coalition winning the election on the promise of improving or rewriting the constitution. BBI doesn't have the same story. And in fact, that is a thing that keeps coming from the statements and the decisions of the judges. When you look at the ruling of the High Court, and when you look at the Court of Appeal, they're basically asking, where are you coming from? We've changed the constitution before, and here is how we do it. Where are you coming from? So there is this whole question of that constitutional moment, because for those very keen constitutional observers, they'll tell you this is not a moment. This is a political proposition from President Kenyatta, his political allies that include former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. The last thing that I wanted to just mention right there is the reference to the Building Bridges initiative as one of his key achievements of the term, and saying, you know, he's going to leave the country united because of that. But when we talk of revenue allocation as one of the issues that he says the first amendment, which is the BBI proposal, did not fail to achieve because it did not go through, is distribution, allocation of resources. But let's remember how divisive that conversation was, and it was actually defeated, Francis, in the Senate. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things really float when it comes to this question of BBI.
Interesting. I don't know whether it is important to tie it together with the squabbles that we've seen between the judiciary, IEBC, insofar as the preparations for next year's general election are concerned, because that's where we are now. The whole discussion is basically now about preparing for the next election. And today I saw the Chief Justice chair or attend a Judiciary Elections Committee meeting. And I've seen various people say now that is the correct place that the Chief Justice ought to have been insofar as preparations for the general election are concerned. And yesterday, we also saw the IEBC team try to explain why the electoral body pulled out of the multi-agency committee on elections. And I would think it was purely a perception question, because anything that would have cast IEBC in bad light insofar as its independence in preparing the next election is concerned, then it would not have been a good thing to look at. And so probably we go back to the whole question of what constitutes preparations for the general election? Who should be involved at what point and for whatever purposes? Because any move that IEBC makes from now henceforth will be interpreted both from a political point of view as well as a credibility point of view.
I mean, no doubt, I think it is important for there to be collaboration between IEBC and many of the other departments in government. I mean, they're certainly going to need to discuss with the Ministry of Health on, you know, COVID-19 protocols. They will need security, they will need financing. But I think it's a matter of who is convening this. Mm-hmm. So if you take a look at the convener of this particular multi-sectoral agency that they pulled out of, it's actually convened by the Ministry of Interior and Coordination and the Office of the Attorney General. The rapporteur of the forum is from the Office of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. Where is the IEBC in terms of convening this? It would have had the power and authority to say, we are the ones who are, you know, tasked with conducting any election, general election, by-election in this country, and therefore we are convening this because we know what we need. If you take a look at even the terms of reference, promoting consultation, advising the government on resources, coordinating electoral assistance by development partners, you know, and many others, providing necessary information for election-related processes and activities, all of these really do seem to be within the mandate of the IEBC, but is now being done by a committee that is not in fact convened by the IEBC, whose leadership does not include the IEBC, including even of the technical working committee of the same forum. That technical working committee, chaired by the judiciary, co-convened by the Ministry of Interior and the Office of the Attorney General, and again, the rapporteur is the Office of the Attorney General. So you can understand this, you know, from the IEBC's point of view, and being very clear about managing perception. But one of the other things that they talked about, it necessarily having to be a legal body. I mean, this can be an ad hoc committee where the IEBC decides, you know, who they want and, you know, needing the touch points that they can then feed off into. But then again, like we say, there's perception because, of course, their withdrawal from this is coming from right after the UDA had sent that protest letter regarding this one. So
you speak about perception, Yvonne, and there's perception in both the judiciary and the IEBC. The IEBC has to demonstrate to Kenyans that they need to have confidence in it as a body that will be able to manage the election itself, have free, fair, credible elections, so that at the end of it all, we're all like, yeah, they did a good job.
No outside interference.
No outside interference.
Which is a big thing last time.
It's a big thing, because last time, remember what happened in 2017? We had the repeat polls. The IEBC's credibility was in tatters, and it'll take maybe a really, really good 2022 elections, I think, for that perception to change. Number one, for the judiciary itself. 2017, kufutilia mbali matokeo ya uchaguzi. I think it was the second time in the whole world that had ever happened, that you say these elections, we are tunafutilia mbali, you have to go for repeat polls. And the judiciaries, I think, if at that time we had done an opinion poll on how popular the judiciary was back then, it would probably have been maybe slightly high because of what they happened. It took guts, and the fact that it happened is still something I think that will be in the history books for a long time. But then now, in 2022, if we end up having cases in court and of course, about the election and the results, the judiciary needs to be seen to be fair. The judiciary needs to be seen that it is there to do what it's supposed to do, which is look at the evidence and come to a decision based on that. So I think the association with this committee, for especially the Chief Justice, is not a good perception. It's not wanasema ile unaona. I think what you see linger more in your mind than even what you hear. So I think that is important for them to consider, that the perception about the judiciary is all about inapasa kuwa mahali unatafuta haki, cases zikija, and in case, unajua, UDA has already gone on record, and we said this last week with the Secretary General speaking about how they wrote a letter and they mentioned it in their rallies. I think what they're trying to say is, if anything happens, tuliwaambia, muone. So I think perception is important both for the IEBC and the judiciary in the eyes of the people.
But you see, Joe, it's not the first time that an election is being held in this country and all the agencies are cooperating in one way or another, because IEBC does not have its own money. So it will have to rely on allocation from the National Treasury. It does not have its own police officers, so they will have to rely on allocation of these officers from the Inspector General of Police and, security policies from the Ministry of Interior. It doesn't have its own signals and systems, so it will have to rely on, from other telecoms that are managed in one way or another, in a supervisory role and regulatory role by the Communication Authority, which is under the Ministry of ICT. But whereas all these agencies have a role to play in preparations for the next election, IEBC must be on the forefront. IEBC must be the driver of this process. Otherwise, anything short of that will trigger perceptions of, undoing and malpractices, so to say.
Joe, the election must be seen to be conducted and administered from Anniversary Towers, not Harambee Avenue. And I think we've said that on this platform before. And I think what Chebukati, the chairman of IEBC, was raising very clearly is, okay, the camel brought its head into the tent, but it seems the whole body is coming in, and they want to run the operation. I think, and let me just go for a minute back to the State of the Nation address. One of the issues the president spoke about there is ending, he says that the third law was about expanding the national executive and accommodate a broader face of Kenya and expand representation. This would have constitutionalized the end of winner-takes-all outcome of elections that creates much toxicity and tension. When you look at the Kriegler report and a lot of these other studies that have been done around elections in Kenya, none of them really point out at the number of positions available. It is the method of conducting elections, how elections are conducted. And the most unfortunate thing is a lot of attention has not been paid to how elections are conducted in this country. And then now there is this new thing which I find misleading about elections that will not have a winner takes it all. All elections, including in estate groups and even WhatsApp groups, have winners and losers. There'll be somebody who will win over another, unless, of course, someone is elected unopposed. The thing is, how do you make that process acceptable to those who participate in it? So that those who lose will not say, I lost unfairly. As a country, we've wasted a lot of time. We actually, you're losing more, another 10th year now in not tackling that question. We've never really followed the script as suggested by Kriegler. We still put together the IEBC so close to the election time. And now there's this whole thing that, there's this committee that looks a bit more powerful than the IEBC. And that's quite a problem. Winner takes it all is the reality of elections in all democracies. If we are a democracy, there'll be winners and there'll be losers. The question is, do we have a referee, do we have a system in place that then says someone lost fairly and someone won fairly? We need to answer those questions.
Great.
All right, and we need to, as Jamila usually says, take this home. And tonight we'll start with Kaikai's kicker.
Birthday.
The birthday boy kicks it away.